Have you ever been introduced to somebody? You're at a party, you're at a meeting, whatever. You're introduced to that person, they say their name, and a second later, you're like, oh my God, can't forget, I can't remember their name. Who are they? Can't remember it. Gone. No idea, right? Have you ever studied something and 5 years later, gone? For me, calculus. Or have you ever had something where you knew somebody's name and it was right on the tip of your tongue and you get so frustrated? You're like, I know the name, I know their name, and you can't come up with it. Well, if any of those things have ever happened to you, you want to stick around for this episode. I am MysterE. This is MysterE's Mysteries, and we are exploring all things mysterious in the world of psychology. So today's main topic, we are talking about memory. We're going to talk about the failings of memory, and we're going to also talk about how incredible our memory can actually be. And I have it broken down into three major sections. And within those three major sections, we have actually three parts. So we're going to explore those parts right now, and we're going to just kind of dive in, and you'll kind of get what I'm saying here as we go along. So if you're watching this podcast, shut your eyes. What color shirt am I wearing? Okay, open your eyes. All right. So if you are just watching this show and you recognize that I had a blue shirt on, what happened there is there was a process where something shifted from your sensory memory, which is incredibly fleeting. And our sensory memory can be a sound or a sight. In this case, it would be the vision of my shirt, and that's called an iconic memory. That's in our brain for a split second. If that got transferred into short-term memory is our working memory. That's going to be our memory that it's present as long as we're paying attention to something. Our short-term memory can store about 7 to 9 items, actually technically anywhere between 5 and 9 items. And that's going to be our memory where whatever we're paying attention to, we can remember. So right now you might be able to say, whatever we pay attention to, you remember. If you remembered that part, that was still stuck in your short-term memory. If you zoned out for a second, got distracted by the family pet or a text message, that left your short-term memory, and it is bye-bye. Okay? So that's short-term memory. So short-term memory is quite limited, right? Only 5 to 9 items at any given moment. Our final memory is our final storage memory is long-term memory. Long-term memory is limitless. So let's do something fun right now with you, okay? I'm going to say a location, and we'll see what memories it draws for you. Ready? Kindergarten recess. All right. Did you have a specific memory that popped into your head? Was it a memory that you have thought about at all in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Okay. What this proves is that we have things in our brain. We have things in our memory banks, specifically in our hippocampus, that we have had stored there for so long that we've never accessed, but it's there. It is absolutely crazy. I could do another one. Your first sleepover, your first birthday party. And we could go on. And these triggers help to bring up these memories from the archives that can make us realize how limitless our long-term memory is. Okay. So it's absolutely amazing. So again, we really have three parts to that initial memory. We have our sensory memory, which is that very fleeting, instantaneous. Okay. Visual memory is a few tenths of a second. Auditory memory or sound memory is going to be 3 or 4 seconds. That's instantaneous. That doesn't even get stored. We sometimes just hope it gets transferred into short-term memory or working memory, which lasts as long as we pay attention to something. So a few seconds to a few minutes, right? 5 items, all the way up to 9 items at any given moment. And finally, we have our long-term memory, which is our limitless memory. That's our memory that is there forever, and it typically stays there, okay? Unless we experience a couple things that we'll talk about later on. So those are our 3 parts to our memory, okay? The next part, this is where we get to those questions I asked about, have you ever been introduced to somebody and forgot their name instantly? Okay. So what you experienced if you forgot their name right after they said it is something called encoding failure. When we want to learn something, we need to have it encoded or placed into our memory. With encoding failure, that name of that person, that never even got into our brain. It never got stored. We were paying attention to something else. We were looking at their shirt, looking at their face, wondering, maybe are they attractive? Or maybe they had food on their face. Or maybe you were wondering if you had food on your face. Or maybe you were worried about making a good impression. Or maybe you were concentrating about what somebody else was saying in another part of the room. All of those things actually stopped you from even placing it into your memory banks. So it's not that you have a bad memory. It never got into your memory. What you experience is what many people call absent-mindedness. We just weren't paying attention. So that's encoding and encoding failure. How do you improve that? Very simple. When you're introduced to somebody, you look them in the eyes, they say their name to you, and you say it back. That slows your brain down, and now you have two opportunities for that name to be encoded into your brain. There you go. Okay, next up, after encoding, we have storage. Storage is what we place into short-term and long-term memory. With this storage, sometimes we have to rehearse to make sure that it stays stored. And sometimes we don't. It's effortless, okay? If I were to ask you what you had for dinner last night, you could probably name it, okay? Without having physically said to yourself, I'm going to remember what I'm eating for dinner right now. You don't have to do that. It's just there, right? Okay. So that's cool. But what happens to that calculus that you learned? What happened to that foreign language that you had studied several years before? What happened to that grocery list that you had created and you had remembered for 3 or 4 days because you didn't get to the grocery store right away? Well, what happens? You experience what is called, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's also known as storage decay. It just breaks down. In our previous episodes, we learned about neuroplasticity and how our brain develops and creates new neural connections, right? Well, we also experience something called neural pruning, and it's like pruning a tree or a bush or a garden, whatever. You trim off branches that are dead or dying. With neural pruning, you trim off neural networks that you're not using anymore. I stopped using calculus. Did calculus still help me with my problem solving techniques? Absolutely. But as far as understanding theorems, that is bye-bye. It is gone. See you later. Okay. It's out the door. It has disappeared. It has been pruned, and it left a lot more room to remember TikTok videos that I watched last week. Sorry to admit that. That's not good. Yeah. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that. But I actually prefer YouTube Reels. All right. Anyway, so that's storage decay. All right. And how do we improve storage decay? By continually practicing, by spacing out our practice, by returning to it often. Those types of things help us to avoid neural pruning. As a teacher, as a business person, as a lawyer, etc., you go back and study again what you had previously studied. If you forgot something, you go back to it and you rehearse it again. I don't use slideshows in my classes. I actually rewrite my notes every year because I don't want anything to go bye-bye. I want myself to constantly come back to it and rehearse it to make sure that storage is stronger and stronger and stronger. Incredibly vital. The last piece is retrieval. Retrieval is how we get things out of our long-term memory. And if you remember, we talked about that tip of the tongue. I mentioned it briefly in our intro. Tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you know something's in your brain, but you can't quite get at it. That inability to get at it is called blocking. Something is blocking it. Okay. a couple examples. We have proactive interference and retroactive interference. Proactive interference is when new stuff is being blocked by old stuff. So I can't remember my new, this is the best example. I can't remember my new password. And I keep typing in my old one that I used for a year, right? I have no idea what my new password is. That's proactive interference. That one definitely occurs. Retroactive interference is when we can't dive into old stuff because the new stuff that we have in our brains is blocking it. So I have students, siblings over and over again, right? I remember my students from this year, but their brother or sister from 4 years ago, 5 years ago, their name escapes me. Why? Because I have 450 names that I've learned since then, and I can't get at it. It is blocked. It's there. I knew them for over a year. Okay. If I had a hint, I could probably come up with it, right? But those are the kind of the three examples of how our memory works. So we have what sorts of memories we have, which are sensory, short-term, long-term. We have how our memory works, which is encoding, storing, and retrieving. And our last section is going to be the best ways to memorize, and those are going to be auditory, visual, and semantic. When I teach, I make sure I'm teaching to these three qualities. Auditory, I make sure I'm saying things so they're hearing it, and I'm oftentimes saying it twice. Okay. Visual, I have this up on the board, and I also have them writing it down. So they're seeing it on whether it's the LCD projector board or the dry erase board, they're seeing it there. They're also seeing it on their paper. They are writing it down. And that, by the way, that process of writing is actually key to memorization. If you're using keyboard and typing, it's not actually quite as efficient in remembering things initially. So it's time saving, the typing is, but it's not quite as efficient as it would be writing the things down and storing that into memory. And then the third, and this is the most important, and that's semantic memory. This is giving whatever you're teaching meaning, okay? It has to mean something to the people that you're teaching it to. It has to mean something to you. I'll make a very simple deal here. I know all the presidents. I have them memorized all the way up and down. And I'll just give you one example of using semantic, auditory, and visual. Auditory is obviously I say it. Visual is I look at it. But the semantic is this. The 13th president is a tough one to remember. I would guess that maybe 95% of you listening or watching don't know who that is. For me, it's easy. It's instant. And it's super easy because number 13 is an unlucky number. The 13th president is Millard Fillmore. Millard sounds like Mallard. Mallard is a duck. Mallard Fillmore is an unlucky duck. It's automatic. Number 13, Millard Fillmore. Yeah, it has meaning to me. That number 13 has meaning to me. And it makes a huge difference. Number 14, Franklin Pierce. Why? My dog died when he was 14 and his name was Franklin. There you have it. So that is going to be all of our things that we learn about memory. I went through it quite quickly. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I am MysterE. This is MysterE's Mysteries. Make sure you follow us on anywhere you can find podcasts. A big thank you to Unify Agency and Bear Wade for directing and producing. Make sure you give us a 5-star and follow us. Hey, you guys have a great day. We'll see you.